The Dominion had conquered 17 dimensions before they found Earth. Their warriors stood 8 feet tall and wore armor that glowed with soft blue light. This light came from their bodies, from their very skin, because they had evolved in a dimension where darkness did not exist. 3 suns circled their home world in an endless dance, and shadows were things they only knew from old stories. When the dimensional breach opened over the Nevada desert at 2:47 in the afternoon, Archon stepped through and looked at the land before him. The sand stretched in every direction. The sky was bright and clear. He could feel the single sun warming his armor, and he found the sensation curious but not unpleasant. Another primitive world, he thought, another easy conquest. The humans scrambled their flying machines. They sent their soldiers. They fired their weapons, watched with something close to boredom as bullets bounced off shields. Missiles exploded against barriers of energy that his people had perfected 1,000 years ago. The humans fought hard, he would give them that. They did not run. They did not surrender, but courage meant nothing against superior technology. By the time the sun began to set, 14 major cities had fallen. They moved through streets filled with fire and smoke. They rounded up prisoners. They established command posts. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then the sun went down. Was reviewing tactical reports in his command vessel when the first strange message came through. A patrol in the city called Chicago had reported contact with enemy forces. Then nothing. He tried to reach them again. Silence. He tried another patrol. More silence. Archon, his communications officer said, I am losing contact with ground forces across the entire eastern region. Equipment failure. I do not know, sir. The signals simply stop. Felt something he had not experienced in over 200 years of conquest. He felt the first small touch of worry. He opened a channel to his ground commander in Chicago, a veteran named who had served beside him in 6 dimensional campaigns. Report. Archon I's voice was strange, higher than normal. They are taking us. Who is taking you? Explain. The humans, they come from the dark. We cannot see them. We cannot hear them. One moment a soldier stands beside me, the next he is gone. I think they are. The transmission ended. Stared at the silent console. In 17 dimensions, he had never lost contact with a ground commander during active operations. He switched to a general broadcast. All units, report status immediately. Of the 800 patrol groups deployed across North America, only 400 responded. Rose from his chair and walked to the main viewing screen. The continent spread out below him, half of it now covered in darkness. He had studied Earth before the invasion. He knew about the rotation, the day and night cycle. He had considered it a minor inconvenience, nothing more. His warriors carried their own light within their bodies. What difference could darkness make? Now he watched as another cluster of life signs vanished from the tactical display. 10 soldiers gone in seconds. No distress call, no weapon fire, just silence. Sir, his tactical officer said, I am detecting unusual movement patterns around our positions. Small groups of humans moving in coordinated formations. Show me. The display shifted to thermal imaging. Saw his own soldiers clearly, their bodies burning bright with the heat of their biology. But moving between them, around them, sometimes within meters of them, were other shapes. Cooler, smaller. These shapes did not move like the human soldiers they had fought during the day. Those humans had charged in lines. These humans flowed like water, staying low, using every shadow and obstacle to hide their approach. As he watched, one of these shapes reached a perimeter guard. The guard's light flickered once, then went dark. The shape melted back into the blackness. What are they doing? Whispered. He found out over the next several hours. The humans, it turned out, had been practicing for this war for thousands of years. Not this specific war, of course. They could not have known they were coming. But they had evolved on a planet where the night held predators. Great cats that saw heat. Wolves that hunted by sound and smell. snakes that could strike in complete darkness. For most of their history, humans had been prey animals. They had learned to fear the night. And then they had learned to master it. Studied the captured data from fallen soldiers' armor recordings. He watched humans moving through absolute darkness as if they could see perfectly well. They wore devices over their eyes that turned night into green-tinted day. They carried weapons that made almost no sound. They communicated in hand signals and whispered words. They knew exactly where every soldier stood because every soldier glowed like a beacon. Our bioluminescence, his science officer explained. In a dark environment, it makes us visible from several kilometers away. To them, we must look like walking signal fires. Can we suppress it? It would require genetic modification, weeks of treatment at minimum. Ordered his forces to fall back to defensive positions around the landing craft. Surely the humans could not attack fortified positions. Surely the night would end and the sun would return. But the humans did not attack the fortified positions. They did not need to. They simply waited at the edges of the darkness and picked off any soldier who ventured too far from the lights. They cut supply lines. They destroyed vehicles. They made the afraid to move. And always they took soldiers. Not killed, taken. The bodies were never found. At first, thought this was simply a matter of the humans disposing of evidence. Then the bodies started appearing. A patrol would find their missing comrades arranged in a circle, their armor removed, their bioluminescent skin carved with strange symbols. Another group would find a single body hung from a bridge, facing outward as if watching for something. A third would discover handprints in glowing blood, marking a path into the darkness that no soldier dared follow. Had conquered 17 dimensions. He had broken the walls of fortress worlds. He had burned civilizations that had existed for millions of years. But as he read report after report of psychological breakdowns among his troops, he realized something that turned his insides cold. He had never fought a species that understood terror. The other civilizations that had conquered were rational. They saw that resistance was hopeless and eventually surrendered. They were afraid, yes, but their fear was logical, calculated. They feared death and destruction. Humans feared the darkness, and somewhere in their long history of being hunted, they had learned to turn that fear into a weapon. They did not just kill soldiers. They haunted them. They made every shadow a threat. They made the night itself feel alive and hungry. By the time the sun finally rose over North America, had lost 60% of his ground forces. Not in battle, not in organized combat. They had simply vanished into the darkness, one by one, taken by creatures who hunted without light. The surviving soldiers stood in tight groups around the landing craft, their armor dimmed as low as they could make it, their weapons pointed outward at nothing. They jumped at every shadow. They refused orders to return to patrol. Veterans of 100 conquests were crying, begging to be allowed to return to orbit. Looked down at the planet from his command ship. The sun was bright now. The cities they had conquered were visible and quiet. Everything looked normal. But in 12 hours, the sun would set again. And the darkness would come back. The first week of the war established a pattern that they had never experienced before. They controlled the daylight hours completely. Human armies could not match them in open battle. Human tanks and aircraft fell to weapons just as easily as they had on the first day. When the sun was up, the invasion proceeded according to plan. Then the sun went down. General Sarah commanded what remained of the United States Special Operations Command from a bunker complex buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was 54 years old, and she had spent 30 of those years learning how to fight in the dark. Night raids in Afghanistan, jungle operations in South America, urban warfare in cities where the power grid had been destroyed. She knew the night. She understood it. Now she sat in a room full of screens that showed thermal images from around the world. Her operators were out there, moving through the darkness, doing what they had trained their entire careers to do. The only difference was the target. Chicago team reports 27 confirmed, her aide said. Moscow team reports 41. Beijing team is still active. Nodded. The numbers were good, better than good. They were losing the daylight battles badly, but they were winning the nights by margins that seemed almost unbelievable. The enemy simply could not function in the darkness. Any response to the light drones? They're deploying them now, General. Every major city is getting coverage. Pulled up the feed from New York. The had launched hundreds of floating drones that cast artificial daylight across the streets. It was a clever response, she had to admit. If you cannot fight in the darkness, eliminate the darkness. She picked up her radio. Bravo team, this is command. New York has light coverage. Execute Protocol 7. Bravo copies command, executing. On the screen, she watched a small group of heat signatures move through the subway tunnels beneath Manhattan. They emerged 3 blocks from the nearest light drone. One figure raised a weapon, a modified anti-materiel rifle that could hit targets at 2,000 meters, and fired once. The light drone exploded. Darkness rushed back into the streets. 3 seconds later, the first life signs began to disappear. The enemy adapted quickly. They deployed more drones, positioned them higher, protected them with energy shields. Human forces destroyed them anyway. Snipers in hidden positions. Other drones carrying explosives. Infiltrators who climbed to impossible heights and planted charges. Every light source became a priority target. They tried different approaches. They ordered their soldiers to increase their bioluminescence to maximum, reasoning that overwhelming brightness might blind human attackers. It worked for about an hour. Then the humans started wearing welding masks and polarized lenses, and the glowing became even easier targets for the thermal scopes of snipers positioned kilometers away. They tried sending their soldiers out in massive formations, reasoning that there was safety in numbers. The humans responded with coordinated attacks that struck from multiple directions simultaneously, creating chaos and confusion, then melting back into the shadows before they could organize a response. They tried staying inside their ships and fortified positions, reasoning that they could simply wait out the nights. The humans responded by mining every approach route, making it impossible to move during daylight without clearing operations that took hours and left soldiers exposed. Nothing worked. Lieutenant Commander David was the intelligence officer responsible for monitoring captured communications. He was a quiet man who spoke 4 languages and had spent 10 years learning to understand how enemy forces thought. Now he sat in General's briefing room and delivered news that made everyone in the room smile for the first time in weeks. They have a word for it now, he said. The closest translation is the devouring black. Their soldiers are using it in personal communications. It appears in official reports. As far as I can tell, it refers to their experience of operating in Earth's darkness. A word for what exactly? Asked. Fear, General. Irrational, overwhelming fear. Their psychological support units are completely overloaded. Soldiers are refusing deployment. Some have attempted self-harm rather than return to ground operations. We're seeing complete unit breakdowns across every occupied territory. They're afraid of the dark, someone said. More than that, replied. They're afraid of what's in the dark. They've started to believe that the darkness itself is alive, that it hunts them, that it wants to consume them. He paused. General, I've been monitoring enemy communications for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this. We're not just defeating them, we're breaking them. Nodded slowly. Good, let's break them harder. She authorized a new set of psychological operations. The teams in the field were given specific instructions. Don't just kill. Haunt. Leave signs of your presence. Make patterns with the bodies. Mark walls with handprints. Let them find their dead arranged in ways that suggest purpose, ritual, meaning. The humans were becoming monsters on purpose. Not because they enjoyed it, most of the operators spoke with found the work deeply disturbing, but because it was effective. They were falling apart psychologically, and every nightmare they experienced made them weaker, slower, more likely to make mistakes. 6 weeks into the invasion, they still controlled the daylight hours. They still won conventional battles. Their technology was still superior, but their soldiers were dying in their sleep from heart attacks brought on by terror. Their officers were unable to maintain discipline. Their entire military operation was grinding to a halt because 1/3 of every day belonged to creatures that hunted without light. General gathered her senior staff for a special briefing. "The winter solstice is in 2 weeks," she said. "In the northern hemisphere, we'll have up to 17 hours of darkness. I want to use every single minute." She laid out Operation Nightmare, a coordinated global offensive that would begin the moment the first darkness fell and continue until the last dawn. Every special operations team in every nation would participate. They would hit every position simultaneously and relentlessly. "The goal is not territory," she explained. "The goal is not even casualties, though there will be plenty. The goal is to break their will completely. When this night is over, I want every surviving soldier so terrified that they will refuse to ever set foot on Earth again." Her staff looked at each other. The plan was ambitious, maybe impossible, but they had spent 6 weeks watching their people perform miracles in the darkness. They had watched ordinary soldiers become something that the greatest warriors in 17 dimensions could not stand against. "When do we begin?" her second-in-command asked. Looked at the calendar on the wall. "We begin on the longest night of the year, and we don't stop until the sun comes up." The winter solstice began in New Zealand at 5:47 in the morning local time. As the last light faded from the sky, human forces started to move. Archon was in his command ship when the first reports started coming in. Attack on the Melbourne perimeter, attack on the Jakarta command post, attack on positions in Tokyo, Beijing, Delhi, Moscow, Cairo, Rome, Paris, London, every continent, every time zone. Everywhere the darkness touched, the humans emerged. "How many attackers?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. Our sensors are showing massive interference, we think." The tactical officer stopped. "Sir, we've lost contact with the European command." "What do you mean, lost contact?" "All signals from Europe have stopped. We're showing no active units anywhere on the continent." Stared at the tactical display. It was covered in red markers indicating attacks, lost units, and communication failures. The humans were hitting everything at once, not with armies or fleets, but with small teams that struck and vanished, never stopping, never giving them a moment to breathe. "Order all units to fall back to the landing craft. We're evacuating ground forces." "Sir, the landing craft in South America are already under attack. The humans have mined all approach routes. Our soldiers can't reach them." "Then send support from orbit." "We're trying, sir, but every ship we send down becomes a target the moment it enters the atmosphere. The humans have positioned forces at every likely landing zone." Felt something he had not experienced since he was a child, back when his parents would tell him scary stories about the old dark, the mythical time before the three suns began their eternal dance. He felt true, primal terror. The night was only 6 hours old. There were 11 more hours until dawn in Europe, 17 in North America, and the humans were not stopping. He watched his forces die on the tactical display, clusters of life signs winking out one by one, desperate transmissions cut short, soldiers screaming about things in the darkness that could not be seen, could not be heard, could not be stopped. His warriors, the conquerors of 17 dimensions, were being hunted like animals. Some tried to fight. They fired their weapons into the darkness at shapes that were not there. They burned buildings to create light. They set themselves on fire, preferring flames to the shadow. It did not matter. The humans found them anyway. The humans always found them. Some tried to hide. They powered down their bioluminescence as much as their biology would allow. They found basements and tunnels and sealed rooms. But the humans had devices that could see heat, that could hear heartbeats, that could detect the chemical signatures of alien biology. There was nowhere to hide. Some tried to surrender. They threw down their weapons and walked toward the darkness with their hands raised. Sometimes the humans took them prisoner. Sometimes they did not. There was no way to know which it would be, and that uncertainty was perhaps the worst terror of all. By midnight had lost contact with 40% of his ground forces. By 3 in the morning it was 60%. By dawn in Australia, the first place where the sun finally returned, it was over 80%. He ordered a full retreat. The evacuation was chaos. Soldiers stampeded toward landing craft, trampling each other in their desperation to escape the planet. Some craft launched before they were full. Some launched while soldiers were still climbing aboard, leaving falling back into the darkness below. Some were destroyed on the ground by human forces who had been waiting for exactly this moment. But some made it, enough to carry thousands of survivors back to orbit, back to the fleet, back to safety. Watched Earth rotate on the main display. The Terminator line moved slowly across the surface, bringing dawn to Europe, to Africa, to the Americas. Wherever the light touched, the attacks stopped. The humans melted back into their hiding places. The world became quiet and almost peaceful. But they knew the truth now. The peace was temporary. The light was temporary. In 12 hours the darkness would come again, and in the darkness the humans would hunt. Archon, his communications officer, said quietly, "I'm receiving transmissions from the survivors. They're refusing to return to the surface." "All of them?" "Yes, sir, every single one. Some are threatening suicide if we try to send them back." Closed his eyes. In 200 years of conquest, he had never experienced a defeat like this. Not because of the casualties, though those were staggering, but because of what those casualties meant. His army, the greatest fighting force in 17 dimensions, was broken. They would never fight on Earth again. They could not be made to fight on Earth again. He opened a channel to his fleet. "All ships prepare for dimensional transit. We are withdrawing from this reality." There was a moment of silence. Then a voice responded, "Archon, should we not leave a warning beacon to prevent others from attempting conquest?" Thought about it. He thought about his warriors screaming as shadows dragged them into the darkness. He thought about the symbols carved into flesh. He thought about the children of his species, growing up on worlds of eternal light, never knowing what darkness truly meant. "Yes," he said, "leave a warning, make sure everyone understands." The message was broadcast openly, in every frequency and format they used for dimensional communications. It was intended as a warning to any forces that might come after, any civilization that might think Earth was an easy target. "This dimension is marked forbidden. The dominant species hunts without light. They see without eyes. They have learned to become the darkness itself. Do not come here. Do not send others. Do not even open a breach to observe. This world belongs to the night, and the night is hungry." The dimensional breach opened 6 days after the winter solstice. The fleet passed through in orderly formation, leaving behind a planet they had intended to conquer and instead had learned to fear. The breach closed behind them with a sound like thunder rolling across the sky. On Earth, the survivors emerged from their hiding places. They looked up at the empty sky and realized slowly that it was over. They had won, not with armies or fleets, not with superior technology, but with something far older, far deeper. They had won because their ancestors had learned to fear the darkness, and somewhere in that long night of evolution, they had learned to turn their fear into strength. General stood outside her bunker and watched the sun rise over the mountains. She was exhausted. She had not slept in 3 days. Her body ached and her mind felt stretched thin as paper. but she was smiling. Her aide approached with a tablet. "General, we're getting reports from around the world. They are gone, all of them. Casualties? Still counting. It's going to take weeks to get accurate numbers." Nodded. There would be time for grief later, time for memorials and honors and the long, painful work of rebuilding. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to feel something close to pride. Somewhere out there, in dimensions beyond counting, the greatest warriors in 17 realities were telling stories about Earth, about the planet where the darkness was alive, about the creatures who hunted without light, about the night that devoured armies. Let them tell those stories, she thought. Let every civilization in every dimension know what happens when you invade a world whose people learn to fear the dark. Because humans had spent their entire evolutionary history as prey animals. They had huddled in caves and watched the night with terrified eyes. They had learned to build fires not just for warmth, but for protection against things with teeth and claws. And then slowly, over thousands of generations, they had learned something else. They had learned that the darkness was not their enemy. It was their ally. It was their weapon. It was their home. The conquerors of 17 dimensions had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. They had found instead a species that had spent millions of years preparing for exactly this war. A species that knew the night, that understood the night, that had become the night. And the night, as the now understood, was very, very patient. On distant worlds bathed in eternal light, the survivors of the Earth campaign woke screaming from dreams of darkness. They saw shadows that were not there. They jumped at sounds in the silence. They would carry the scars of this defeat for the rest of their lives. And somewhere on Earth, in a bunker beneath the mountains, General Sarah finished her coffee, looked at the rising sun, and allowed herself one quiet moment of satisfaction. They had done it. They had turned humanity's oldest fear into its greatest strength. They had reminded the universe that some worlds were not meant to be conquered. And if anyone ever forgot that lesson, the darkness would be waiting to teach it again.